Hey there, and welcome to this new series that I am creating on watercolor skies for beginners. In this video and the upcoming ones, I'm going to be taking you through a series of exercises where I teach you how to paint soft, fluffy, believable clouds using the wet on wet technique. In today's episode, we're starting with the simplest sky. It's kind of a bright, sunny day sky. And in the upcoming tutorials coming up over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be sharing my process for painting evening skies and sunsets where we're bringing in more colors. Because this is the first episode in this series, in the second part of this video, I'm also sharing must-know information and tips that I would love for you to take with you onto the exercises that we're going to be working on over the next couple of weeks for greater success. All right, with all that said, let's jump in. In this video, I'm going to be sharing my process for two separate sky studies. Both of these were created by following the same strategy, using the same techniques, and the same 5 colors. The difference is simply the type of cloud that I am painting. In the first one, I'm painting more common clouds, rounder, and in the second one, my clouds are wispier and longer, more like cirrus clouds. And honestly, I would recommend working on both and working on more cloud studies because it's not until you paint many skies that you start becoming comfortable with this. I'm using my Van Gogh watercolor set for these studies, and the first thing that I did was I mixed together my Cobalt blue Ultramarine and a little bit of Prussian blue. And there is no specific ratio that you need to go with here. For that color mixture, I would just recommend mixing a warmer blue and a cooler blue together until you arrive at a blue that you enjoy, that you feel would look believable in a normal sunny sky. Prussian blue is a cooler blue, and Cobalt blue and Ultramarine blue are warmer. I created a nice large puddle of that blue mixture, and I was going for a coffee consistency, so somewhere around 50% paint, 50% water in that mixture is what you want. With that ready on my palette, I started using my large round wash brush to pre-wet the entire sheet. You can use any large round brush or even a mop brush for this. And I'm bringing out a little bit of water at a time from my container and gently smoothing it on my paper using horizontal and vertical brushstrokes until I see a nice even sheen. It is very important that you take your time with that pre-wetting process. Make sure that you don't start dropping in any paint until you see that nice even sheen. Otherwise, your paper is going to start drying way too quickly because dry paper is thirsty paper and you won't be left with these soft effects that we're looking for. Once I saw that nice even sheen, I continued using the same large wash brush. I loaded up those paintbrush bristles with a good amount of my blue color mixture that I had ready on my palette, and I started visualizing these cloud shapes, having the most common type of everyday cloud that I see out in the sky in mind as I am very loosely starting to describe these clouds. Essentially, you are painting these clouds negatively, right? Because you are painting the blue around the cloud shapes. I do have perspective rules in mind as I start creating these cloud shapes. I make sure that the clouds that are higher up are larger, and as they get lower in my picture plane or closer to the horizon line, they get smaller and smaller, more narrow or less tall. You can see how at the bottom I mostly used linear horizontal strokes as I was painting those more narrow smushed clouds. Another thing that is very important is to have irregularity in mind. You don't want to create any patterns or organized looking shapes. Now, I know that as beginners, it can be very difficult to visualize cloud shapes, and I want to encourage you to observe reference photos for the types of clouds that you are trying to paint, or go outside and look at the sky firsthand. Once I painted in those clouds, I removed that color from my paintbrush bristles. I removed that excess water by dabbing the tip of my brush on my absorbent towel. And I went in to soften some edges here and there, maybe pull a little bit of that blue pigment into large white areas so that I don't have a very large flat white shape. and you can soften any textures that might have happened, but I want to encourage you not to overwork things and leave things be as much as possible. Then I quickly loaded up my paintbrush bristles with more blue color mixture, and I started dropping in and intensifying some sections in order to develop a wider range of blue values in the sky, creating darker, more saturated areas and lighter, paler areas. At this point, you can use more of a milk consistency. Everything is still wet and workable at this point because I took my time with the pre-wetting process and because I've been painting pretty quickly. Here, I'm once again softening some edges, maybe even doing a little bit of lifting, using the clean and only slightly damp bristles of my brush as a little absorbent sponge to remove some excess color from some areas, just continuing to give shape to these clouds while simultaneously trying to increase the range of values throughout my sky. It is important to have irregularity in mind. You want to stay away from the look of patterns and organized shapes. Keep everything loose, keep it flowing, and allow the shapes to take form on their own. Don't be overly controlling or try to get rid of every single little texture that happens, because you can end up overworking your piece and making things look too stiff. I noticed that my paper is still wet at this point, so I'm dropping in a little bit more color here and there until I arrive at a look that I enjoy. I'm starting to notice that certain parts of my paper are starting to dry, so it is time to call this first layer done. I'm allowing everything to dry completely, and then I'm going to be working on layer number 2. This in and of itself with just one single layer can work as a beautiful, simple, believable sky for any landscape or nature scene. But this is what I would do if I wanted to add some soft shadow shapes. I allowed that first layer to dry completely. That is very important. Instead of just using a ready-made black or gray, what I am doing is creating a dark, kind of grayish purple color, which I created by mixing together some Prussian blue, the cool red that I have in this Van Gogh palette, which is Madder Lake Deep, and a little bit of Payne's gray. First, I mixed together the Prussian blue and the Madder Lake Deep until I had a secondary purple looking color, and then I just added a little bit of Payne's gray to gray it down. Once I was happy with that shadow color, I removed that paint from my paintbrush bristles, and I went in with this medium-sized size 14 round brush and very carefully pre-wetted over the white areas of my clouds. Alternatively, you can do what I did for my second study, which was use a fine mist spray bottle to wet that paper so that you can once again work on a wet surface and arrive at those soft effects that we're looking for. But if you are doing your pre-wetting with your brush, just be very, very gentle as you're smoothing those paintbrush bristles over that paper. You don't want to start scrubbing your paper because you can reactivate that paint underneath that has already dried. And if you want to work more slowly, you can even work cloud by cloud. Just make sure that you wet past that area that you're thinking of developing shadow in, because otherwise the paint that you drop in can reach the edge of the shape that you have wetted, and if your shape that you have wetted is too small, you can arrive at sharp defined edges. This said, you can always go in and soften edges with a clean and only slightly damp brush. Run your paintbrush bristles over that edge that you're looking to soften, and as long as the paint is still wet, that's pretty easy to do. I'm dropping in this gray purple color where I visualize the underneath or lower planes of these clouds to be, as well as shadow areas created by overlapping clouds. Continue taking mini breaks and seeing the study as a whole, making sure that you're not going overboard with the gray and covering up too much of that white paper, because otherwise you can end up with clouds that look more like storm clouds as opposed to sunny day clouds. All right, and that is it. I am all done with this first cloud study. And now I'm going to be sharing my process for my second study, which are longer, more wispy clouds. And I'm going through the same process, the same 2 layers, same techniques. It's just that for this one, I'm using different brush strokes, longer brush strokes as I'm creating the shape of those long wispy clouds. But now I'm going to be sharing my favorite cloud/sky painting tips so that you can take your landscapes and nature scenes to the next level. My first tip has to do with composition, and it is to keep the sky simple if the sky is not the focal point. If the focal point or main action area that you want to pull the viewer's attention to is below the horizon line or on the ground, make sure that you don't create a super dramatic looking sky. You want to keep the composition balanced and make sure that as the artist, you are strategically deciding where you want to pull the viewer's attention to. And if your piece is a cloudscape and the sky is the most important part of the piece, and it'll be dramatic, maybe super colorful, or there's a storm coming in and it's part of the narrative, then consider keeping the ground stuff relatively simple. Tip number 2 is yes, observe reference photos. Yes, observe what skies and clouds look like in real life, but don't try to copy reference photos or whatever it is that you're looking at exactly as they are. Because oftentimes when it comes to painting organic objects like clouds, rocks, even water, that can actually hinder you and make you arrive at these stiff, unnatural results because you're trying to copy things too closely. As I explained throughout the last painting process, you want to do your best to keep things loose, keep things expressive, and allow the shapes to take form as you are painting. So study reference photos to understand the main characteristics of whatever it is that you're drawing or painting, but within that, allow yourself to work loosely. Tip number 3 is make sure that you're going in with a strategy. Even for these 2 cloud studies, which are going to be the simplest ones in this series, I made sure to go in with a strategy to think about how many layers I would be working in. I knew what colors I would be mixing together. I knew that I would be pre-wetting and then painting in my color. But going in with a strategy is even more important when you're going to be painting a sky like some of the ones that we're going to be painting in the upcoming episodes in this series, where you are mixing warm and cool colors together, say like a sunset, where you have oranges and reds and maybe dark blues. You want to be careful because you can arrive at muddiness or colors that you weren't intending to create, such as green if you mix together yellow and blue. So whether you're going to be painting warm colors separately from cool colors, or if you're going to be careful to not over blend as you're painting, maybe swatch out the color mixtures that you're thinking of blending before going in. Whatever it is that is going to help you avoid unnecessary accidents and unwanted colors, test that and take notes, do studies, quick explorations before attempting to paint a sky in a full piece. Tip number 4 is make sure that you're always bringing to mind those perspective rules, especially if you're looking for believable results where there is depth to your scene. You want to make sure that the clouds that are higher up in your picture plane are larger because they are closer to us as the viewer of the scene. And as they recede and get closer to the horizon line, you want to make them smaller and smaller. I just think of it as compressing those shapes, making them less tall. I'm always using more linear horizontal motions as they get closer to the horizon line. And another thing that is helpful, especially when painting skies that are mostly one single color, is to keep the darker colors or more saturated colors in the upper section and then make those colors paler and paler as they get closer to the horizon line. Tip number 5 is to work wet into wet, especially if you're going for soft effects in your sky. especially as a beginner, because you're not working as quickly as more skilled artists that have been working with watercolor for a longer time. Maybe you're still developing your water and brush control. Pre-wetting your paper when you're painting large areas or washes is incredibly helpful because number one, it's going to give you more working time before things start to dry on you. And number two, that water that you have prepared the paper with is going to do half of the work for you in terms of creating those soft, organic, wet on wet effects. Because remember that watercolor is always going to expand when it is placed on wet paper. And when you're painting on dry paper, that paper is very thirsty, and the water and paint are going to get absorbed into that paper immediately, and it's a lot more likely that you'll arrive at splotchiness, lines, and unwanted textures. So really consider using the pre-wetting technique and working wet into wet, and then if you'd like, you can use wet on dry in layer number 2, like I teach you how to do in another one of my sky painting tutorials, which I'll make sure to link to down below. And tip number 6 is to avoid overworking as much as possible. Visualize those brightest areas where you want to leave that paper shining through unpainted, and then place your color confidently around that and allow the paint to expand and allow those shapes to take form on their own. The more you go in and try to fix little textures, the more likely it'll be that you will start overworking things and arriving at splotchiness because certain sections are going to start to dry. The more you fuss about little teeny tiny imperfections and textures that happen along the way, the more likely it'll be that you'll arrive at overworked results because certain sections of your paper are starting to dry and you're losing time trying to fix those little imperfections, when at the end of the day, those imperfections can actually make things look more realistic and more natural. So use these studies as an opportunity to practice not only your wet into wet, but also to practice going in confidently and leaving things be so that you can arrive at fresh, light-looking results. And a very important part of working quickly is choosing the right brushes, because when you're painting larger areas or even medium-sized areas, you want to go in with larger brushes because the larger the brush, the more paint and water you're going to be able to load up in your bristles, and the more paint and water you have in your bristles, the more you're going to be able to paint with just one single load of your brush. If you're using a brush that is too small, you're constantly going to have to stop and reload your brush, and every time you do that, your paper is drying. So make sure that you have the appropriate tool in your hand for what you're trying to do. That is it for my 6 main tips. Do have these in mind as we move forward with the next 2 episodes in this series. I'm super excited to share episode number 2 with you coming up next week. Thank you so very much for joining me on this tutorial. I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy your art practice and see you very, very soon.